Hi, my name is Keith Jordan, originally from Mobile, Alabama. Tracy, my wife, we've been married 28 years. God's blessed us with 3 daughters and a son-in-law. I grew up one of 3 kids in the middle, and not the brightest of the 3. My brother and sister are both really smart, and I was the awkward kid in the middle. My dad was a heavy-handed authority figure. My mom was really extremely patient, and when you put those 2 together, it just allowed me to wander off into a lot of trouble. When I was about 7, I attended a revival with some friends, and when I came home to share that news, the family really just dismissed it, and life went on. Beyond this decision that I've made to place my trust in Christ, it really wasn't developed from that point going forward. As I got into teenage years, things like alcohol abuse were prominent in my life, hanging out with the wrong group of kids. Relationships that I had, I was more abusing those privileges than really honoring that. Through college, really had an interest in getting a corporate flying job is really what I was after. And so not long after school, I interviewed with this guy. He's wealthy, intimidating, really big ego, and a pretty demanding guy. But I was willing to take on that job because that's what I had pursued through school, and it was exciting to me. So I want to share a story with you that occurred while I was flying for this guy. So imagine April the 1st, and this intimidating guy who is your boss comes up and says, "Unless we're going to Dallas, don't put any fuel in the airplane." So he shows up the next morning and says, "Let's go to New Orleans." So we hopped in the airplane and took off, and in the climb, a low fuel warning light comes on, and I reached over and transferred some fuel from a reserve tank. And then the light goes out. So we're coming into New Orleans, and in a descent, we're around 17,000 feet, and the light comes on again. Well, at 10,500 feet, both the engines on the airplane quit. So I knew of an airport behind us. I got the airplane turned around and set up in a glide, descending at 3,000 feet a minute. So here between 10,500 and the surface, we're talking about a 3-minute time period. And I knew, given the distance to this airport, that there was no way we would make it. And I remember saying under my breath, "God, we're not going to make it." And so we're at about 1,000 feet, and I see an interstate, which is I-12, and it's running east and west. We cross over an overpass. I bank the airplane to the right, clear the overpass. In front of me is a car and an 18-wheeler. They kind of move along. I clear the overpass, drop the gear locks, and we land on the interstate. You're probably thinking that's really cool. Well, what I'm sharing with you is this is not a hoax, and this is really not something to get wrapped up in. What I want you to see is God intervened in a time when I was helpless. Later in life, I approached my dad about having a different kind of relationship with him. And what I wanted was a relationship with him that was centered in Christ. Our relationship with each other was at times abrasive and distant, and I was at a point in life where I wanted more. And then a point came where his health was deteriorating, and dementia began to set in with my dad. And I realized at that point that this relationship I had been after with him, I would now no longer be able to have. I made the decision to just start loving on my dad, regardless of how he responded. My dad's health really deteriorated. He'd had a stroke. He was in a rehab unit, and I went to visit him for a couple of days, and before I left, went to his room. Shortly before he passed away, he professed Christ to me. It was he and I alone in a hospital room. For him to share his heart that way with me covered all the wounds of the past. Now, not long afterwards, my dad passed away. What I would want you to take away is that God demonstrated to me the extent of his patience by showing up one day and really giving me an extension on life. Grateful is not a good enough word. And to be able to extend forgiveness to my dad and that be a real healing chapter in my life, that is not something that I could do within me and could only come from God. The significance that the world offers is empty. Real significance is found in a relationship with Christ. If you've heard this before and just turned away from the message of Christ, perhaps today is a day when God's pressing in on your heart and perhaps he's even pounding on you.